Hi everyone. Today I have a somewhat different video for you than I usually post. This one is about repotting some of my houseplants into a semi-hydroponic mixture, which I call Pon. So for any of my junk journal friends that watch some of my postings, if you want to skip over this one, that's quite fine. This one is all about my houseplants. For the others who are interested in this video, these are two of the houseplants that I have potted up, and this is the new mixture. And I will explain more about it as you continue to watch the videos. I will show you some of the befores and afters and the mix, and I will explain to you what all is in it and how I go about it. Hi again. So this is going to be my Pon mixture. It's a substrate mixture that I'm mixing up for a few of my plants, and it's loosely based on the Lechuza Pon that people can buy online. Now the issue with Lechuza Pon is it's often not available and it's pretty pricey. So I decided to try and mix up my own Pon mixture, and I'm going to repot a few of my plants, and I will follow up with a few videos over a time period of a few months to let you know how this worked out. So this mixture is a mixture of pumice, lava rock, and I'm going to add some zeolite, which seems to be important for neutralizing any minerals in the pond as the plants grow. And I also have some small Lecca. I have a plant right now planted in it, and I'm going to transplant it because it's not doing really good. So I'm going to mix the Lecca, which are small hard clay balls, in with this mixture, and we shall see how it goes. Some plants seem to thrive on just Lecca. Some plants seem to thrive on the Pon mixture, and I want to see how plants will do in the mixture of all four substrate materials. So I'm going to take a picture of the plant that I have right now in Lecca balls, and then we will see how it does after I transplant it. So this is the plant that I have right now in Lecca. Some of the leaves have started to shrivel over time, and I've actually lost a few of the leaves on the bottom. So I don't think it has adapted to the Lecca yet. Excuse me. The roots in this plant are roots that are meant for soil. And I'm going to check and see if it has started to sprout any water roots yet. I tried to get this Lecca as dry as possible because a lot of people seem to think that planting dry for a couple of weeks encouraged root growth. But when I put the Lecca in this mason jar, it was a little bit wet from me rinsing it, and it has really retained the moisture. And I think that's because of the narrowed lid on the top of the mason jar. So I'm going to let this Lecca dry off a little bit, and then I will repot this in the mixture of 4 items. And I'm not going to add any fertilizer for a little while either, until I see if root growth is promoted. The other plant I want to try right away is my orchid. Right now it's in an orchid mixture, and the roots are not a real healthy green the way I want them to be. They are brown. It does seem to be thriving because it is growing a new little flower shoot, and a couple of new leaves. But we're going to transplant it anyways, and we'll see how it does. Hopefully it doesn't lose its new flower shoot. So I have taken this succulent out of the Lecca just to check how the roots are doing. And they are quite dry and very brown. And I don't see any new root growth at all on this succulent yet. I do see a little bit of mold, which you don't want because that will promote root rot. And root rot will travel up the plant and kill off the plant. I did spray these roots with hydrogen peroxide to deter root rot, but I'm going to spray them once more with some more 3% hydrogen peroxide and get rid of some more of this mold. And it looks like, despite the moisture that was in the Lecca, these roots are fairly dry, and the plant as well at the crown of the root here has shrunk a little, almost like it is dehydrated. So I'm going to change my mind and add just a bit of moisture when I transplant this plant. These are the Lecca balls that the succulent was planted in, and you can see that they are moist. These balls are quite small. They're only about a 1/4 inch in diameter. Now the ones that I see most people on YouTube talking about are quite a bit larger, somewhere between 1/2 inch and 3/4 of an inch in diameter, and they're not as evenly shaped as these ones were. But these ones were the better buy online, so they're the ones I went with. In hindsight and listening to a few videos, they may have been a good idea, because any plants that have fine roots don't seem to do well in the larger Lecca. There's too big of air spaces around the roots, and they don't seem to take. So hopefully this smaller Lecca will still work well, because the plant that I'm transplanting, the succulent, has quite small and fine roots. So we'll see how it goes after I transplant it. The pots I'm going to use are not the self-watering variety. I have these pots with holes in the bottom from a gardening center. I've cleaned them up and sterilized them, and I'm going to repot the succulent in this. Succulents don't mind a dry period, so I'm not using the self-watering system. When I go to do my orchid, I will probably put it in a self-watering system and see how it does. This pot is about a 4-inch diameter on the top and about a 3-inch diameter on the bottom, and it's about 7 inches tall. So I'll get busy and I'll repot that succulent and show you when I'm all finished. So I have gone ahead and trimmed up any of the dried up roots and anything that had mold on it from this succulent. And I have also sprayed it with hydrogen peroxide, 3% solution. And I'm going to let that dry off a little bit, and then I will put it in the substrate mixture. Now when you first take your plant out of soil and you're going to transfer it into a substrate, one of the things I have learned that everybody agrees on when I watch the YouTube videos is that you should rinse as much of the old soil off your plants as possible, because it also could promote root rot, as well as transferring any bugs or anything that are in the soil into your new substrate. So these are just bare roots. Even though they are brown, they have been cleaned off really well of most of the soil. And hopefully now there will be less mold or root rot when I transplant it. So the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put this mesh in the bottom of my flower pot because the holes on the pot are fairly large and the substrate mixture, some of it will fall right through. So this I just cut out of a small nylon bag that I had in my drawer, and I think the size of the holes on this will be just perfect. So I'm going to put that in the bottom of the pot. While I'm letting this roots and the hydrogen peroxide dry on the roots of my plant, I'm going to mix up the substrate mixture. Now what I've decided to mix is 2 parts of the pumice to 1 part of lava rock, 1 part of the Lecca, and 1 part of the zeolite mixture. As I stated before, the zeolite is an important mix in this as well because it takes out minerals or neutralizes minerals that may show up from hard water or several waters of your plant over time. And this mixture is quite often used in aquariums as a filter for the same reason. So I'm going to make sure that I have added enough of that into my substrate mix, and once my roots are dry, we will then pot it up. Now, because I don't want my succulent sitting in a bunch of water, I have filled this pot about half full. And also because this is not a really tall plant, so when I put it in here and I fill it up with the mixture, I want it about the same level as it was before. So I have planted up my succulent, and this is what it looks like. Now I also had 2 small pieces that I put in here that had broken off prior to this from handling it. That one and this small one at the back. Pon mixture is supposed to be really good for propagating and rooting, so we're going to see how those 2 do as well. And if they do root up after the roots are well developed, I'll probably repot those as well. So that's my 1 plant, and I will keep you posted how it does. And the next one I'm going to be repotting will be my orchid. So this is a continuation of repotting some of my houseplants into a new substrate mix. In my previous portion of this video, I repotted this succulent. And I forgot to tell you the name of this succulent. So it is a Cressula ovata named Gossamer Jade. And now in this video we are going to have a look at repotting my orchid into the substrate mix. And this is a Phalaenopsis orchid. I got this about a year ago and it was blooming when I got it. Now typically when you get these orchids, they do often come potted in this little sphagnum moss or peat moss that they are grown in. And it is recommended that at some point you remove this because it may constrict the roots. So I will be removing that. As you can see, these roots were not constricted in that pot at all. Now there are quite a few really healthy roots here, which we will be trying to preserve. But there are also some dead and some even decaying roots, and I will be trimming those off before I repot this orchid. Then I will do like previously, and I will rinse them in warm water to remove as much of the orchid bark and stuff as possible. And I will also give it a little spritz with hydrogen peroxide to kill off any bacteria or anything that's been in the mix that is not good for it, and to try to prevent some root rot or anything when we repot. Now I know there are some die-hard people out there who swear by this orchid mix, and I don't have a problem with that either. I mean, they've been growing orchids in this mix for many, many years, and it's obviously worked really well. But I'm all for trying new things as well, and especially if the new things will save a little bit of time. So I'm going to try potting this orchid into a self-wicking or self-watering system. When I took apart the pot, I found that it was already in a self-watering system, or in this case a self-draining system. It did not have a wick in the bottom of it, but this pot was lifted up about an inch above the other pot that it was inside. This one had holes and the other one did not. So I'll be repotting it back in this one in my quadruple pon mix, and we will go from there and see how it turns out. Now this quadruple pon mix again is a mixture that I have put together, and it is the 4 components. It is roughly based on what is called Lechuza Pon. Lechuza is basically the name of a mix that is sold online, but it can be very difficult to get a hold of. So there are many recipes or suggestions of how to make your own pon mix, which is what I'm doing. And I will follow up with further videos, and we will see how everything grows and how it goes. So now my orchid has a flower bud coming out on it right here, and hopefully that survives, as well as a new leaf coming out here. And I'm hoping this is not too traumatic of a change for it. And it's got an awful lot of healthy little roots shooting out, so we will try and preserve those as well. Some of these roots are air roots, and we will leave them that way. We won't bury all of these roots, because typically in its native environment, orchids have a lot of air roots. They're not buried in soil or anything where they grow in the rainforest. So we're going to leave them as natural as possible. So I will continue on with rinsing and snipping these roots, and we shall see how it goes. So I wanted to give you a little overview of what I'm doing here. This root here, as you can see, has some dead stuff on it. This root, there's nothing left to it, this portion. It's very soft, and when you push on it, there is nothing in there. And then on the bottom of the root, it has an unhealthy portion as well. So I will be snipping off this root. And then you can see a couple of pieces here that I have snipped off as well that were definitely not healthy, and there's nothing left to it. So they're not viable roots anymore. And I still have a couple other portions here that I will be testing and taking off. As you can see, this one is barely hanging in there. So we'll be cutting that off as well. And that's what I'll do. I just continue with this and clean them all up. Okay, so here is my orchid once I have rinsed off the roots. And I was fairly gentle with this because some of these roots are a little fragile and some of them are pretty new, fresh growth, and I didn't want to damage that growth. But I was fairly ruthless as far as what I trimmed off. Anything that didn't have new growth and looked like it was old, dried up, or rotten, I did trim. So you can see here that I even trimmed off one that had new growth on it, but simply because it was barely hanging on by this tip here. It was still green, but maybe in unpotting it, I damaged it. It was, all the outer casing was gone, and it was just hanging on by a few fibers. So rather than have bacteria or something enter that root and cause rot, I just trimmed the whole thing off. Now when I repot this orchid, I will have to make sure to dry it really well on the surface of the plant. I will go in there with some Q-tips and make sure I don't have any moisture lingering in these leaf nodules, because that can also lead to crown rot and root rot. So you don't want any moisture sitting in there. And as you can see, I did get some of the bottom leaves wet, so I will have to make sure to go in there with a paper towel or a Q-tip and dry those off really well. All right, so this is ready now for me to spray with the hydrogen peroxide, and then I will let it dry, and then I will continue to pot it up. Okay, so I've got my pot ready to repot. Again, you can see I put some of that fine bag in the bottom because the holes on this are quite large and I didn't want the substrate falling out of it. I've also put some wicking up through there so that it is a self-watering system. Now they recommend that you don't use cotton or linen or natural twine or anything for your wicking thread, because anything organic can break down over time and add something to your soil or your mixture that you don't want in there. So what I used was that little bag that I cut apart for the bottom of the container. Also had this tie rope at the top of it, and it's a synthetic material, so I just reused that and it will be my wick. And then I put a lot of the lava rock in the bottom because the holes in this are fairly large and I didn't want any of the substrate falling out. So I put the lava rock in the bottom and I will add some more of the substrate on top. As well, this will allow there to be less pooling of water in the bottom of the pot, and that you don't want with an orchid because you don't want to promote root rot. So now I will continue to pot this up. Okay, so here is my orchid all potted up in the pond mixture, and I've dried it off. Hopefully there's no water resting in the crown or in any of the leaf axils. And this is what it looks like, and that is the wicking hanging down there so it can self-water. Now the container I want to put it in is this one, and it's quite a bit bigger. So to lift it up, I have put a container in the bottom. It's a couple inches high, and that's where the water will sit in the that will be the reservoir down there. And so it will also act as a stand so that the orchid is never sitting directly in water. And so this is what it will be like. Make sure my wicking goes down on the side. And so there it is. My orchid all potted up into a new pot in the new pond system. And I will keep you abreast of how it goes. I'll try and check in once a month and update everybody. Now, one more thing to note is that I did not add any fertilizer to either of the plants that I replanted. Lechuza, the name brand Lechuza Pon, actually has a slow release fertilizer in it that usually lasts between 3 and 6 months, I believe. But I did not want to go that route, so I did not put any slow release fertilizer in this. I have special orchid fertilizer that I use, and I give it to the orchid when it's flowering a couple times a month. And as for the other plants, I will do the same. I will give them fertilizer as I feel they need it, and that way I can control when it gets fertilizer. So other than that, the only other thing I don't think I mentioned is that this is a semi-hydroponic system. Hydroponics is when it's growing in water, and because it's not in soil per se, it is a semi-hydroponic system. So other than that, we will see how it goes and I'll keep you apprised. I do have another plant that I'm going to plant up as well in the pond, and that is my Thanksgiving cactus, a Schluenbergia truncata. And right now it's in full bloom. It has been pretty much since last October. So I'm not sure if I'm going to pot it while it's blooming, but it will soon need a rest. So I may go ahead and just pot that up. And if I do, I will record that as well. Thank you. So once again, I have another plant that I'm going to repot and put in a semi-hydroponic mixture of my pond. It's a quadruple mixture. And as you can see, this one is flowering. It has been flowering for many months, and it's probably due for a rest soon. When I took it out of the pot, it was quite dry. So right now I just have it in another bowl and I'm letting it soak up some water. Otherwise, I will damage the roots too much when I try to take the soil off of it. So I'm just going to let it soak for a little while, and then I will be removing the soil and washing the roots. Okay, so I just wanted to follow up. I have now cleaned off my Thanksgiving cactus. Now this plant has really fine roots, so I didn't completely clean all the soil in here off. I went as far as I felt safe doing. I didn't want to stress the root system completely. When you're potting in just Lecca, it seems to be more important that you clean as much soil as possible off these roots. But when you're potting in pond, the way I am, it doesn't seem to be as important. So we're hoping that this is good enough, and we will see how it goes. Now I have sprayed them with hydrogen peroxide again, hoping to kill off any bacteria or anything that was growing in the roots, or to stop any possible root rot or anything from happening. This is my pot that I have ready. Again, I put a screen in the bottom to stop the substrate from falling through, and I've put a wick in the bottom for a self-watering system. A little bit about the Schluenbergia truncata, which is the Thanksgiving cactus. It's a succulent, and in its natural habitat, which is subtropical or tropical forest in southeastern Brazil, it is epiphytic or epiphytic, which means it grows on trees or rocks. So it doesn't normally grow in soil anyways. It also has tiny aerial roots, and we'll see if you can see some of those right there. So hopefully that means that it's going to be easy to grow and regrow some new roots if it needs to. And it usually makes it fairly easy to propagate too if you want to do that. So we're going to try it in the semi-hydroponic substrate and see how it does. And it does not like too much or too little water, so hopefully a self-watering system should work. It does like humidity, so sitting above a reservoir of water should be good for it also. When you're watering these plants, it's best to use soft water or rainwater. Okay, so here is the Thanksgiving cactus all potted up and looking much happier, I think. So I will be following this plant as well, and I will let you know in a month how it is doing. So my next plant that I want to repot is my peace lily, or spathiphyllum. This one is a smaller variety. It has smaller leaves overall, but it was struggling in the pot. All these rhizomes were in the same pot, and so I have divided them all and washed them all off, sprayed them, and now I'm going to repot them. Now, spathiphyllums like to be fairly moist all the time, and this one has been either getting dried out or maybe a little bit of over fertilizing, but probably more like drying, too dry, because it was fairly root bound in the pot. They are in their natural environment, usually growing near streams in Central and South America or even Southeastern Asia. So they are a tropical pot and they love humidity. I'm not going to put this one in a self-watering pot because it doesn't mind being moist. It doesn't matter if it's got quite a bit of water. So I'm going to go ahead and get the pot ready for this one and pot it up. So this is the peace lily all potted up, looking much better than it was before. And the only reservoir it has is this saucer in the bottom. So it'll be watered like it normally was before, with quite a bit of water, at least once a week. And I ended up with a few rhizomes that were quite a bit smaller than the original flower or the original plant. So I potted them up in a separate pot. They may or may not survive. We'll see how they do. Okay, so I have decided to add on one more plant to this video. I transplanted this succulent as well. It is a donkey's tail or burro's tail. Different people call it different things. The scientific name is Sedum morganianum. I think I pronounced that right. Anyways, in transplanting this one, which is quite typical, a lot of the little leaves were knocked off. But it should be fairly easy to reroot this. I just laid them on top, and even if only a couple of them root, then I will have some more new plants and it will fill out this pot a little bit. And being a sedum, it should do fairly well in this pond mixture. I've put it under this grow light, so hopefully that encourages new root growth and the plant will survive. I did have to cut a few pieces off because the stems had got quite bare from losing all the leaves, but I just stuck those smaller pieces of stems in the pond and hopefully they will root also. So this is another one that I will be following up with a video in a month or so, and we'll let you see how it does. Thanks for watching all my videos or all of my plants that I transplanted, and I hope you really enjoyed this video.